and then, is God calling me to be a banker or a lawyer? I don't know. I don't know if God even knows or cares. He does care if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
He does care if you are living with the fruit of the Spirit, that you've put off the old self and you're putting on the new self and being renewed in that each day. And you can do that in many, if not most, vocations.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Shock Absorber podcast. I know it's been a couple of weeks, but we are here and we are ready to go. Well, I'm here joined by one person at least, Tim. Tim, hello.
Hello, Joel.
How are you?
I'm doing very well.
You look, what do you think of the addition to the new studio behind you?
Yeah, it's great. There's some soundproofing going on.
Some soundproofing. It looks good on camera though, because I've done a couple of chip lunches and it looks quite good on camera. Okay. So slowly evolving the studio.
I have to check it out. I know I'm usually just an audio snub.
Yes, fair enough.
So I need to go on YouTube and check it out. So if you're like me and you're only listening to this, check out the YouTube.
Hit the bell on YouTube.
Hit the bell on YouTube. I think I am subscribed, but by the time I actually look at YouTube, I've usually listened to everything already.
Yeah, that's right. We haven't been on for a couple of weeks. Week away, we've been on.
We have,
which is when we go away as a church for 5 days. Mm-hmm. Tell us how you went. I
loved Week Away this year. Yeah,
did you?
It was great.
What you said this year? Like, what made it this year a special year?
Like every year. What did I like? I intentionally took 2 weeks leave, which was great, from YouthWorks. So, which meant that leading up to Week Away, I had 4 days before we went away to just very slowly, leisurely get all the kids' stuff together, do the printing and the collating and the cutting and all that kind of bits and pieces, which I'm often trying to do while working at the same time for YouthWorks. And so I feel very rushed doing that. And so this year was a lot more leisurely. So that was really good. And then when we come back from Week Away on the Wednesday, and I still had, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, clocked off, which was nice. And so, I think I just personally felt more relaxed going in, which was quite nice. In terms of, actually being on Week Away, I mean, it just relationally was excellent. Teaching was great by Anthony.
I agree with that.
Talking about freedom. I wasn't really sure what he was going to cover going in. I hadn't really thought much about what it was going to be as a topical series on freedom. But I was really, really stoked on what we covered and how Anthony framed it up, and thinking about what does it actually mean to be free. And the idea that stuck with me is that God is free in and of himself, in the sense that he is free to do whatever is in line with his character, which, if you look at that sort of negatively, you can kind of say, well, he's also constrained by his character. So there's a certain lack of freedom there, in that God is not free to be malicious. God is not free to be petty. He is not free to be unjustly angry. He's not free to do whatever he likes. He is free to do anything within the constraints of his character. And so that idea was really interesting. And so thinking about, therefore, when we become Christians and we are brought into God's family, the Spirit is making us more like the person of Jesus. The fruits of the Spirit are, the fruits of God's Spirit. We are becoming more like Christ. And so we are becoming more and more like God, and therefore the freedom that we live in is more and more like God's freedom, which is a freedom to do whatever we like within the constraints of God's character.
Yes. And
I really like that way of phrasing it. The other thing that stuck in my head was Anthony talked at one point about, he was talking about the 10 Commandments, but just talking about any kind of rules that we put around obedience to Christ, and saying it's common to think of the commandments and the rules as boundaries. And he said it's kind of like a playpen. Here are the boundaries of the playpen. Go nuts, do whatever you want inside the playpen, but just don't break the rules. Don't go outside the boundaries. He said, actually, that's not a biblical Christian view of rules at all. Don't get rid of the boundary language. Actually, the freedom is not inside this boundary. The freedom is in and of itself the acting in obedience with the commands. And so it's just this reshaping of thinking that freedom is not after, like you obey the commands, and once you've done that, freedom is a subsequent,
like a
byproduct of obeying commands. No. The freedom is actually living in the commands and being obedient to the commands.
Yep.
And that again was just a really nice way of phrasing it that made me go, oh yeah, that's what's going on. That actually obedience to Christ is in and of itself freedom. It doesn't create freedom. It is freedom. And the only silly analogy I could think of as we were talking about it as small groups was it's like telling my kids to set the table. We're getting ready for dinner. All right, kids, come on, set the table. And a wrong way of saying it, let's set the table and you obey me and set the table so that afterwards we can enjoy being a family together. It's like, well, no, actually, them participating in the setting of the table is in and of itself participating in the family.
Yes.
So it's family life is not subsequent to them obeying the command. Family life is them obeying the command and going in and doing it, joyfully and willingly and engaging it. So I just thought, that was a really helpful way of framing it as well. So anyway, there's a few little snapshots, lots of fun, lots of games, lots of things. So it was it was a good time. How did you find it? You were not well for some of it.
No, for this second year in a row, my week away was affected by illness in some regard. Which I found very frustrating because I really enjoy a week away and I want to spend time with lots of people, and I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't feel like I could do that as well, and I didn't want to make anyone sick. So that was I'm a little bit frustrated about it if you can't tell, but it was still good, and I love, like, my kids just love it.
Yeah. Your kids had a great time.
Yeah. My son's still telling me, I had a dream last night about a week away. It's almost 2 weeks ago. But I just echoing your thoughts about Anthony's talks was just, I could just tell how much he'd thought about it. And just the contrast in terms of what the world says freedom is to what true freedom is. And freedom is not without any limits or boundaries. It's the best way of living through God's constraints, like you're saying. And that's the thing that probably just impacted me the most was not knowing how to think about that. And I think as a result, you can share that, like share the gospel in a way. I find it more helpful to be able to share the gospel in a way that people understand it, what freedom is. So you could say you could have freedom from everything to someone that doesn't know the gospel, and then they'd be like, great, so I can do whatever I want. I'm like, oh, no, not really. Oh, so it's all about rules then? Well, no, but that's where I think there was just far more nuance that Anthony brought to the table but based on God's foundations of that was where I found a lot of value in. And we had some really great discussions with someone in our discussion groups where someone who wasn't a Christian and someone who has only recently become a Christian, plus a whole lot of people that have been Christians for a while. And they were asking things about the Trinity and all those kind of things. And it like really challenged me to think about how to articulate that. And I think with Anthony doing that in a sense, and then like it really brought that to light of like, oh, we need to be better at this as well. Yeah. So that was fun.
Yeah, that was really good.
So I still had a good time. But yeah, I was just frustrated. I just couldn't be my full self, full expression. Anyway, should we move on?
Yes.
I'm glad you had a good time week away, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
We've got a few different, what do we call it? Cultural artifacts. Sorry.
Yeah. Bit of a holiday roundup.
Yeah, that's a good way of expression. Do you want to go first? We'll do one each and see how we go. Why don't you take it? Take the lead on this, Tim.
Oh wow. Okay. Regular listeners will know I listen to a lot of Cal Newport and his newsletter as well, and he made a sort of an offhand reference to a book called Ultra Processed People. And he used the analogy of ultra processed to talk about then technology because that's his jam. But it intrigued me and I went looking for it and it was at our local library, so I borrowed it out. And so, I read this book about ultra processed food and talking about how there's some organisation has classified these 4 different types of food. One is, organic, you find on the farm. The second is food that is created solely from those products. Third is created from those products with some sort of processing, but fairly minimal, like canning or preserving or cooking or something like that. Then the fourth category is the ultra process. So where you largely break down food to their lowest common denominator and then build them back up again. So you deconstruct food down to a chemical nutrient level and then rebuild them back up. And his top example, which the family and I were laughing about a lot, was Pringles. Because there's no way that's actually potato. It's they're not even pretending that it's cut from potato. They completely deconstruct the potato, mix it with a whole lot of things, right to its starch level, and then build it back up into a perfectly shaped little disc. And so much so, it's hilarious. He talks about this court case in the UK and this weird British, basically their version of GST.
VAT.
VAT, yes.
Value added tax.
Yes. So in the UK, because they're British and they're a little bit weird, so kind of like here in Australia, the basic foods are not taxed and luxury foods are taxed. Now, somewhere back in time when this was first being set up, for some reason, cake was described as a basic food. Oh. So if you have just a basic cake, because everyone needs cake, right? Chips, crisps in a packet, well, that's a bit of a luxury item. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so Pringles in the UK went to court because the tax agency said, "Oh, well, you're a crisp, you're a chip," and they said, "No, we're not." And they argued against their own food, saying, "No, we're not a chip. We're more like a cake because we break down the potato so much. We put it all together, make it into a batter, chop it up, cook it like that. It's much more like a cake than it is like a chip." And so the first court that they went to, they won, and it was granted that yes, Pringles are more like a cake than like a chip, and therefore don't have to have VAT applied, which obviously saves the company huge amounts of money. It eventually got overturned and said, no, it is a luxury and it is does have VAT applied. But he used that throughout, to just sort of talk about this fact that you've got these foods that completely broken down and then built back up again. The intriguing thing is that they know scientifically that these things are really unhealthy for us. Yep. They're not sure why. Oh. And so because they've done studies where you look at products that have been made up from a nutrient level from the ground up versus basically farm to plate type foods, farm to table, is that what you call it?
Yep.
And they've done tests where the same types of food, so two different types of foods, one ultra processed, one farm to table, and they can construct them so they have the same nutrient level. Mm-hmm. And the people who eat the ultra processed versus the farm to table are massively unhealthier, but they're not exactly sure what's going on at this point, because lots of people argue, well, it's the nutrients. It's all about, you get your proteins, you get your calcium, you get your iron, you get all these, your starches, your fats, et cetera, and as long as you get them in the right proportions and quantities, you're fine. So if you get those through processing or you get them through farm to table, it shouldn't matter. It weirdly does, but at this point in time, they're not actually sure why it does. So something about breaking down foods and then building them back up again has massive health implications. So that was wild. And so, I'm not sure what I'm going to eat now. Yeah.
That's, I think my wife and I and our family kind of been on a journey of like trying to cut out a lot of processed foods. And
Well, your family's been great at it for a very long time.
Great at it, have we?
Well, I often think that your family, is someone like you avoid a lot of processed food. You're looking for, low processed things.
I think the interesting thing is that it's almost like breaking an addiction. Like sugar and stuff can be addictive. Yep. And actually my wife, thank you, that's very nice of you to say that about a family, but it's all credit goes to my wife for changing kind of how we ate and what food we cook and things like that. But she also alerted me to the fact that companies, like you're saying, the whole process thing, when you feel the feeling of being full, There's a reason for that. Your body says that's enough.
Yes.
You've eaten enough food, whatever. So some companies have a process, and I forget what it's called, so forgive me for not knowing the name, but they manipulate the food in a way that there's enough, the sugar, they manipulate, in particular sugar and fat, to make you not feel like you're full. So you eat more of the food. So you overconsume the food.
Yes, absolutely.
I think one of the examples of that, and I'm only saying from my personal experience, is Tim Tams.
Oh, right.
That I can smash a whole packet of Tim Tams. I haven't done it for a very long time, talking about changing how we eat, but a whole packet of Tim Tams and just like, I just want more, I just want more, I just want more.
You never quite feel full.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think one of the links that you're making is that, and that Cal Newport did, was that you get to that point where you eat a whole of Tim's, and like, I don't even know why I'm eating all these.
Yes.
I don't get to it. But I think it's the same with the content that we consume as well. It's like, what am I doing?
Yeah, and that's where Cal Newport went with it. He talks about, the idea is that farm, like this level 1 type food, you could eat as much of that as you want, and you pretty much, it's impossible to, get obesity, diabetes, all of these kind of food-related illnesses from that. Like, just eat as many apples as you want. Almost nothing will go wrong with you. Eat as much, whatever. And so Cal Newport says things like books, long form, content, in depth, slows you down. Read as many books as you want. Very little. So the next tier down, the sort of slow process, intermediary is, long form podcasts, newspapers. It still takes a little while to digest, but they have broken down some of the content for you and put it into a slightly more digestible process. And he said the ultra processed is your social medias,
like TikTok or
your TikTok, your
Instagram Reels,
Twitter, Facebook, all of these kinds of things. Just the people's comments back and forth, and you just end up doom scrolling. And it's the same thing. And I can't remember who the author or person was you talked about, but that idea that you can, when you procrastinate, was it about the procrastination, where you can be doom scrolling your phone, and you get to a point where you're bored of doom scrolling, and you still keep on going, and you've gotten past the point of this is no longer just satiating my boredom. I now hate myself for this, and I'm still going. Why am I still going? I'm not quite sure. And it's the same thing like smashing the thing. I can easily do a whole thing of Pringles, like just by myself. Like no worries.
Probably doing the same thing.
Yeah. So anyway, all it's done at the moment is make me feel guilty about what I eat. I haven't actually really changed much of what I eat, but anyway, we'll see how we go.
Oh, it's a process.
It is a process, yeah.
It's a process getting off ultra processed.
Yeah. And the other thing he talks about is the definition he uses is it's the ultra processed foods are marketed for excessive consumption. And so that's part of it as well. And he talks about bottled water. And he says technically it's not really processed because they don't actually do anything. But by bottling it, branding it and advertising it, all of a sudden you've got a food whose existence is dependent on market share. And so therefore it taps into another kind of abuse of food, which is that these foods exist so that you will overconsume. Whereas, what brand of eggs do you get? Well, who knows? What brand of beef do you buy? I don't know the farmer's name or where it came from. Those kind of farm to table type things don't have product names attached to them. Their existence is not dependent on market share, not at the consumer level, maybe further back at the level where you're selling to shops and whatnot.
It makes me think of, have you seen Liquid Death?
Oh, no, what's that?
It's water, but it's packaged like it's in a can, and it's packaged like it's either alcohol or energy drinks.
Right.
But it's literally just water. That's all it is. But it's $1 billion brand. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And it was just came, and I just looked up the website, and the line is "Murder your thirst."
Right.
With Liquid Death.
Which is why I liked, and then remember, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, a number of cafes and restaurants in Sydney, I don't know if it was more widespread, but they'd bring you bottled water and it was branded tap.
No, I don't remember that.
It wasn't actually bottled, it was just literally tap water.
Yeah.
And it was just, the bottles that they had were just refillable bottles, but they had this kind of fancy little tap.
Tap.
Basically kind of this dig at, we're just we're just giving you tap water, man.
Yeah.
Like it's literally out of the tap. You refill this bottle and we plonk it on your table. That's what we're doing.
I think it's all very fascinating how you can create a brand that's called Liquid Death.
Liquid Death. That's brilliant.
Liquid Death, and I've seen it all on a lot of the comedy podcasts I watch. That they're on that. They obviously they've branded themselves extremely well. It's called Mountain Water. That's what it is. And you can get sparkling and some flavors now, but that's originally they just started as a completely. It's just canned water, not bottled water now.
Right.
Anyway,
Even their website is just all very TikTokified, isn't it?
yeah, but of the time, very clever move. But,
super clever.
Yeah. Speaking of long form content,
yes,
there was one that I thought was interesting. Is that drawing your attention to a Substack called Sporting Intelligence, which is by an investigative journalist. I don't know how to say that. By the name of Nick Harris, and he's investigated a lot of things, especially to do with corruption in sport. So, FIFA is a big one for him, and also cycling. And he is now releasing a series, and I think he's hinted at it being a 10-part series called Skyfall, which is basically exposing the underbelly of British cycling's golden age, which was from about 2012 onwards, and that included Bradley Wiggins won the Tour de France, first British person to ever win the Tour de France. That was in 2012, and then they also had a huge amount of success at the London Summer Olympics in 2012, especially in cycling. And this is what I find really fascinating about, if you're a really good journalist and you have a Substack, you don't need to worry about as much as the legal ramifications in working for a newspaper anymore. Because he said one of the reasons that this information hasn't come out so far, he hasn't been able to publish it, he says he's been working on it since 2012, was because there was too many legal ramifications publishing it.
Yeah, publishing houses are going to be more conflict averse.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially and newspapers too. You have to we have
yep.
to make sure this is 100% or we can't do it.
Yep.
He's also exposed things to do with doping in other Olympic sports as well. But I just find it really fascinating. I love this kind of journalism. I think it's fascinating. And the people that are willing to work on, as he says, 5 years of investigation between 2012 and 2017 for me to accumulate sufficient evidence to convince my newspaper's lawyers to let us publish it. But then despite that evidence, the story was spiked, which means killed or prevented from being published because of internal politics.
Yeah.
And I just think it's interesting that the internet and something like Substack, and if someone has the cultural and the expertise of Nick Harris, is able to actually publish this, and everyone will go, "Oh, this is actually the truth. It's not made up. It's not sensationalist. It's actually genuine reporting." And he can do a 10-part series on it and not even have to worry about getting paid by the newspaper. He's just getting subscribers because he's so good at his job.
Yep.
So we've talked about cycling before in terms of especially the Time Hamilton book, The Secret Race, and and how that affected Lance Armstrong. The whole thing of Sky and their success in the Olympics as well was that they claimed to be completely clean. And this story is exposing that that's actually not the case. And that they employed a number of people, previous cyclists who had been caught for doping, or coaches that have been known for doping for a long time. And the reason and the way that they said, one of the reasons they said was we're completely clean, was that they just had to sign a form saying that they haven't been involved in doping. And that was basically it. Having said that, that probably wasn't the case. So, anyway, I just shining light on. I love this kind of journalism where people would spend ages exposing something.
Yep.
The truth.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a great format for as you say, this kind of journalism that would not get a run in other media spaces,
especially because of the economic incentives in regards to newspapers and things now.
Yep. It's interesting that you had things like newspapers being gatekeepers to news, which is important because you can't just run your mouth off and write any kind of crazy story. But sometimes the gatekeeping stops legitimate stories like this.
Yep.
The flip side of this is anyone can start a Substack and write who knows what.
Yeah.
And this is, it's the way up, the pro and con of democratizing publishing is that, you take it out of the realm. So that those who might not otherwise get published, who have legitimate things to say, have spaces to do that. And you get a whole lot of crazies who will throw out stuff or throw out slanderous things without any repercussion, whereas the newspaper would have stopped and said, no, you can't say that until you've proven it. Yeah. So,
it's very true.
It's this give and take of like this, internet age where anyone can publish anything. But it's great that, I mean, obviously he's got a name attached to it. He's putting his professional credentials on the line.
He wouldn't have that audience if he didn't write for newspapers for many, many years prior to this.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, we see his credentials. It's it's fascinating. And with the Olympics starting up today,
I think that's
at the time of recording.
Yes, I believe that's one of the reasons why he's releasing it right now.
Yeah, right.
Finally, in terms of our holiday roundup, we've been talking about the Rest is History podcast, is something we've brought out many times before.
Yeah, great podcast.
Yeah, it is a very fun podcast. And the one thing that I dip in and out of it. Sometimes I'm like, I'm not that interested in that. But however, there has been a series. They currently have a series called The Road to the Great War. But just before that is the Murder of Franz Ferdinand series, which is in 4 parts. And I've really, really enjoyed it. It's been really, really fun to hear. They're actually in Serbia at the time. Serbia? I think it's Serbia. No, Sarajevo. They're in Sarajevo. Yes. When they're recording it, and it's really fun to hear the host. They usually record over online, but it's fun to hear them engaging together because they're across from each other like we are right now. But Dominic, one of the presenters on it, is very well versed in this area, and particularly like the Balkans, as they like to call it. And it's just fascinating to hear the impact of Franz Ferdinand, if you didn't know, was murdered, and that was what kicked off World War One. They've then gone into World War One later on. But what fascinates me, and we were kind of talking this before we started recording, is the influence of that kind of empire idea of different empires have come in, come out, or been taken over by other empires, and really impacted what happens leading up to the World War One. And then impacts World War One, which then impacts how we live today, for example. So that's what I think Rest of History are really good at drawing out as well. I know that you're a little bit further along in the World War One series than I. Have you got the similar kind of thoughts, or you have learned more? You said you needed to get a map up, which I did too. Yeah,
I'm not great with names and dates, like they just don't stick in my brain, but big themes do. So there's a couple of episodes in the Franz Ferdinand series where they're going into the life of the assassin and where he came from and who his family was and all his connections. And
Gavrilo Princip.
There you go.
Is his name.
So, I mean, even his name is not stuck in my head, and certainly not all of his family and friends and all the connections that he made. But the big sweep is really interesting.
Yes.
But yes, I also need visuals. So this is sometimes with the Rest is History, I'm like, I need to pull out a map.
Yeah.
Where are we? What are we talking about? And we'll say just before we started recording, I don't have a great memory of that kind of Balkan region, and I need to always pull out an atlas and go, okay, what countries where? What's going on here? It's that kind of southeastern part of Europe is not strong in my memory, and so
do you really pull out an atlas though?
Sorry?
Do you really pull out an atlas?
Well, not a physical atlas. Yeah, on your phone. You can.
Oh, okay. I thought you were whipping out the atlas.
No. I do. I've got a very big book at home called An Atlas of World History. Maybe I should print that out. And it goes through obviously it goes through the whole world. But this era of empire, which, I mean, kind essentially
signals
World War,
the end of it.
Well, yeah, World War One and then certainly World War Two really puts the death knell in it. Though you do get the USSR sort of coming out of that, which is
that's true.
Similar, different, but yeah, this idea that you would have empires made up of many, many people groups that ruled by a particular monarch, or the dual monarchy or the dual rule, as in the Austro-Hungarian Empire had, which was also fascinating.
Yes.
Something I did not know. This dual leadership of that empire versus the Ottoman Empire, which is bringing rise to this Serbian conflict. So that was really fascinating to see that. And then a little bit further along, they'll talk about the ramifications of the assassination and how it starts to spill out, because you have these, the clash of countries that the assassination brings, and then all of their friends and the respective friends that they have. And it's really interesting, the episode I listened to this morning, the presenters talk about how sometimes the history of the World War I is written up in such a way that all these people were really eager for war, and particularly the old men were really excited by war and wanted to send the young men away to war and to battle and to die. And they're pulling out all these letters back and forth and these telegrams that happen and saying, actually, that's not true, that a lot of those who were in power were trying hard for this not to escalate, but also were a little bit naive sometimes in the way that they would talk to each other. So, my friend over there, cause we're always going to be with you if you went into battle, but that's not going to happen, right? Right. And they're like, no, probably not. Probably, maybe.
Look, we've declared war.
All of a sudden we're in war. And so all of these kind of, geographic relationships, because they're British, the rest of the history guys are British, the last couple of episodes I've listened to, they've talked about the British context and the back and forth that they'd had. Were they going to be friends with Germany? There was there's actual biological relationships.
Yes, through the royal family.
Through the royal families. The Kaiser is the grandson of Queen Victoria or something? Or
there's something like that.
Something really close. Again,
I remember learning
names, dates, not very clear in my mind. So, fact check me on that one.
Yeah, I remember learning in history high school, but...
Yeah. So they're like, Germany seems like it should be a good ally, but maybe not. And then there's all the reasons that maybe they should side with France instead of Germany. And then Germany feels that France and Russia are ganging up on them, even though there's not actually anything going on, but they feel that there might be. And if they don't preeminently attack, then, maybe they'll be on the defensive. And so there's just all this intrigue. And so they're the kind of the broad sweeps that stick in my mind of like, this is how this came about, not particular names and dates that don't stick in my head, but these broad sweeps of these countries have allegiances here and there, and this story of how it just ended up into chaos. And it's in a sad way fascinating to
I never want to glorify war, but I find it fascinating the effect and impact it has, and what caused it, and then what it caused afterwards. Yeah.
It's a good series.
It is a good series. Speaking of another series, let's move on to our resiliency and discipleship series that we've been working through, thanks to this book named Faith for Exiles by Dave Kinnaman and Mark Matlock. We're up to practice 4, and I might just remind you of the first 3 practices that we've looked at already. Practice 1, to form a resilient identity and experience intimacy with Jesus. These are, I should say, the 5 practices of resilient faith. Practice 2, in a complex and anxious age, develop muscles of cultural discernment. Practice 3, when isolation and mistrust of the norms forge meaningful intergenerational relationships, something we very much enjoy talking about. However, for today, practice 4, to ground and motivate an ambitious generation, train for vocational discipleship. And I'll just define what the authors call vocational discipleship. They say it means knowing and living God's calling, especially in the arena of work, and right-sizing our ambitions to God's purposes. Now I found this kind of an interesting read because I know that this book it's very much focused on Barna research, which is only in the United States of America. And so it could have just been how I've grown up at church, but I also found that sometimes I'm just not sure if this is really applicable to how I grew up. And it might be because I'm in a different generation as well. But they say in things like the arena of work and calling, we live our identity and deploy discernment and generate relationships and pursue significance in the world. Thus, the 4th way to build resilience in the digital Babylon is through vocational discipleship. I was going to ask you first, And we kind of talked a little bit before we started recording. What do you think vocational discipleship means when you hear that?
Yeah, well, first I thought they were talking about vocational ministry, where like you're actually doing ministry as your vocation. But I realised as you were sharing that, no, it's how to be a disciple in your vocation, whatever that be. Yeah, if you're a plumber, you're a lawyer, you're an electrician, whatever your work is, how do you do that as a disciple of Jesus? And I think that's really helpful to think about, and think about how do we as churches equip people for that. I think what they're noticing, and I've heard other authors mention this as well, but that we do a particularly poor job of that often in the church. And whether intentionally or unintentionally, we have this sacred secular divide where the things that go on in church are the most important things in someone's life. And as ministers, we often therefore encourage people to be engaged in ministry, engaged in service, using their skills that they might have from the vocational world. And go, oh, you're a lawyer. Oh, great. We have these important tax codes that we need to think about. You know,
come and help us with this.
Can you help us with this? Oh, you're an accountant. Oh, do you want to jump on parish council and help us run our numbers? Oh, you're a teacher. Do you want to come and do children's ministry? So we think about how can the vocational world help our church to function well. What I don't think we often do well at is how do we help the people be disciples of Jesus out in their vocational life. And so whether it be with students at school, like how do you actually be an intentional Christian at school? And yeah, sometimes the stock answer is, well, invite your friends to church. That's how you be a Christian at school. So, I mean, yes, but there's a whole life here. There's a whole, it's not just the missional evangelistic side of things, though of course that's going to be an important aspect of being a disciple, but it's also, you know, living a quiet life among, you know, the pagans, Peter writes about, you know, so that, you know, and always have a good answer for when questions arise. But it's this idea of we are out in the world, we are and meant to be disciples of Jesus in all aspects of our life. And I think that as churches, we've often got very excited about evangelism, we've got excited about ministry, we've got excited about what happens at church on a Sunday or midweek, and we have often neglected to think about how do we actually help the people live the 80% of their life, which is not at church. And it's out there in the world. They're doing 40, 50, 60 hours a week in their vocation. How do they be a Christian there? It's not just about running a prayer group at lunchtime. It's not just about inviting your friends to Christianity Explained, though of course it is that as well. It is, yeah. But it's also how do you actually do your job as a disciple of Jesus, living in obedience to Jesus, as you know, Anthony talked about. It's, you know, how do you live out the fruits of the Spirit as a air traffic controller, as a, you know, whatever.
What a job! That's
pick
great.
Your field, yeah, whatever it is. So I think that is what they seem to be touching on here, and I think that they are noticing a bit of a gap.
Oh, to just to that point, he says we are convinced, based on mountains of data, that most churches ignore such topics amongst the young. It's a huge blind spot, and too often church leaders pay attention to vocation only when it relates to how already successful people can then serve the church.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I suppose, and it's you've touched on it already, but it's send people out from church, and then it's almost like once they're experienced or good at something, hey, you can come back and help us at church, so we can do a better job at church. Do you think that's partly? We've kind of talked about before about church almost becoming a production, or perhaps very professional. Do you think that's a result of that? A pursuit of we've got to make church like the world to make it appealing to people, that we'll get the experts back in so we look just as much expertise as the world.
Oh, right. I hadn't made that connection, but yes, I can see that might be the case. I think it's just sometimes just a failure of imagination to remember that for those of us who are vocational ministers, our world is the church. Like that's what we're thinking about all the time. So we're thinking about what goes on the weekend and midweek, and how to be disciples of Jesus in our Bible studies, and how do we resource people, and how do we resource children's and youth ministry, how do we resource small group ministry. You know, we have we run lecture courses and Berea courses on how to help people grow in their knowledge, love, and obedience to King Jesus. It's the lack of application to, okay, cool, Tim, that's great, but so what for me in this job? Like, this job is, 40, 50 hours of my week. How do I be a disciple there? And I don't think we often answer that question well enough for people in the kind of very specific ways of application that will help them know how to be a Christian in their workspace, with their work colleagues, with their the particular pressures of particular jobs, and how to do that well. So I think that's often where this comes from.
And as your point as well, that as much as we like to create longer time that we spend at church here at Soul Revival, it still is only a small portion of our most of our weeks.
Yes.
You and I currently work 1 day a week here for Soul Revival Church.
Yep.
So we're kind of straddling both full-time, or not, to some degree of full-time work plus working a day at church. I actually remember that, like, you saying those things brought up a memory that I had back in when I'd only kind of started working full-time out of uni, and I had a thought as like, I don't know if our church really talks about, at least, full-time workers very much. And this may have been a little bit crass, and but they're the ones that are funding the church. So not to say that it's all about getting in money.
Yeah, so we're very thankful that they're earning wage.
Yeah, but it's like I wonder if we are helping them as much as possible.
This is part of that sacred secular divide. Is the really godly people become missionaries. Those who aren't willing to go overseas will become ministers. And then there's everyone else, and their role is to fund ministers and missionaries so that they can do the important work. So I'm really stoked that you're a baker, and I'm really stoked that you're a lawyer or a corporate such and such, or a nanny, or whatever the role. And please make sure you give that money to the church so that we can do the really important things in this world. And I just think that there's that's a divide that I don't see evident in Scripture, in the way that Paul and Peter are two of the particular epistles who just talk about there are places in both of their letters where they just talk about the regular rhythms of just being in life, like just earning a job, like pay for your family. Yes, give money to the church because it's great. It's appropriate that those who minister to us are freed up. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians. But for the most people at the church are not in ministry, and that doesn't make them second-class citizens. And I think that we've accidentally often, I don't think many people would articulate that as a theology that they agree with, but in practice, that's sometimes how we express, or the neglect of talking about, oh, you're a lawyer, tell me about that. What is it like to be a Christian in that space? What are the particular challenges and joys for you in that? You're an electrician. What are the spaces where you find it easy to be a Christian? Or what does discipleship look like in that job when you're driving around, visiting clients, doing this, whatever it is? Like, helping people think through that. And then when we do application in our sermons or our Bible studies, putting that into, okay, so great, as a XYZ, how can you live that out? What are the ways in which you, in that regular rhythm of everyday life, which is not Bible study or church attendance, but is just all the other hours of your week, how are you being a disciple of Jesus? And actually helping them to think through that. And when he talks about young people here, I'm thinking about high school students, with their particular subjects that they're doing. How do you think about that? Like those who are doing IT, how do you actually build IT platforms that express godly characteristics and that doesn't mean they're evangelistic. It just means that, do they encourage, again, the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, beauty, not beauty, goodness, self-control. What was I was thinking about beauty?
Beauty, I understand
Truth,
beauty.
goodness, truth, and beauty is kind of the trifecta as well.
Yeah, okay.
There's a special name that theologians use for those. But is it good? Is it true? Is it beautiful? And so does your IT platform, as you're building code for this, are you contributing to something that is good, that is true, and is beautiful? And helping them actually articulate that and give them language for that so that they can think about, I've noticed that I'm working for this company and one of our biggest products that we create actually fuels this, that does this, and the consumers use like this. And that's actually not generating truth, goodness, or beauty, or it is. It's actually allowing for good creativity in the world. So to help our students who are doing IT, whether high school, university, vocationally, to think, okay, so as I write this code, as I build this website, as I generate this document, this program, whatever it is, am I helping them to have language to express why this part of their life, which is, again, full times, 40, 50 hours a week, is actually being a disciple of Jesus? And then they can actually articulate, I'm a disciple of Jesus because I wrote this code today and it's going to contribute to this. And that will help ease this particular pain and frustration in people's lives because we're developing a product that does blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be evangelistic. It doesn't have to have, you don't have to hide a Bible verse in your code or like any this kind of tokenistic. It's just God wants us to be out in the world and he wants us to be doing good out there. And it's part of that creational mandate that we have in Genesis 1 of to go and subdue the world. And, some of that is, yes, telling people about Jesus. Some of it is creating penicillin. Some of it is creating bionic ears for those who are born without hearing.
Yep.
Some of it is writing code to help with an iPhone app that helps with whatever. Like, you see what I mean? Like, there are different ways. And so I think that's what he's saying is there's this gap that we have where we don't help people be disciples of Jesus in their vocational life. But if we want our young people to stick around, which is this whole idea of Faith for Exiles, we want them to see that their faith is directly linked to what they're doing.
Yeah, I like that because he even says, the authors say, the key opportunity of 21st century church is to infuse the vocational imaginations of this new generation with the purposes of God. And when I read that, I thought of like how you're saying, there's the missionary and then people that don't want to go overseas as they're a pastor or a minister. And then there's just the people that go to work. And I think in a sense, it almost feels like that's a bit of a human-made, I think that's what you're saying, a man-made construct that minimizes the impact of the gospel and God's all-encompassing power. And it affects, and we're saying that God can't speak into these areas almost. Like I feel like we're in danger of doing that. I'm not saying we're definitely doing it, but I'm saying we're in danger of doing that if we just continue that separation without thinking. And if we go back to the book, one of the other things he says, it talks more about the young person's side, that it's an ambitious generation because they're products of things like Shark Tank and there's creatorpreneurs on YouTube and things like that. And he said that 26% of teenagers think they will definitely or probably be famous by the time they turn 25, which is a side effect of, as they described it, life in a digital Babylon and making it on YouTube or any kind of some platform on the internet. And then it also touches on the gig economy, self-employment, those kind of things. That there's a less of a, even talked about in my generation of like people who got jobs in the 50s would stay in the same role or the same company till they retire.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore and often doesn't happen at churches and things like that either. But traditional workforce is even getting more and more different now. So things like the gig economy, they talk about like Uber. I can earn money whenever I want. Now, there's also drawbacks that they talk about. Is there's no annual leave, there's no sick leave, there's no benefits that come with that and all that kind of thing. But would you say that this generation is more ambitious or less ambitious than another generation? I mean, this generation is more, we're talking about 18 to 29-year-olds. But
I wonder if
or is it more just more public?
I wonder if the sense that it's achievable is closer. So
being famous is
being
achievable.
famous.
Yep.
Yeah. So
which is probably true.
Well, our generation, you grew up wanting to be a TV star, or a movie star, or whatever. Like there were people in the popular imagination.
Hang on a second.
You're like,
what TV star did you want to grow up as be?
but that sense of growing up to be famous,
yeah, sorry,
I don't think is different.
Yeah,
like you grew up and go, oh, wouldn't it be great to live that lifestyle?
Mad sports star.
Yeah, mad sports. If you're a sport person, like, oh, wouldn't it be great to be the captain of the Wallabies or the captain of whatever, or to be an F1 driver and for everyone to know your name. And so I think since we've had popular culture and we've had access to those kinds of stories, and I don't know how achievable they felt to our generation, but now you've got that same kind of inbuilt desire. I want to be known. I want to be valued. I want to be, my name in lights, kind of the idea. But like when you can create your own Substacks, YouTube, TikTok stars, Instagram Reels, when I can create that in my bedroom, and if the luck of the algorithm actually picks me up, plus the hard work of intentionally creating the personality and the types of reels and the whatever that actually will help match the algorithm and get caught in that cycle, and I might get picked up, and then all of a sudden it feels closer. Yeah, so when we were kids, we might have had that, wouldn't it be wonderful to be part of the Australian cricketing team, or be a TV star on such and such, but actually, like, was that realistic? Probably not. I mean, I had one guy in my year 6 class who dabbled a bit in acting and just trying to do extra work, and we just thought he was the best because he got this non-speaking part on water rats.
Oh, water rats.
Yeah.
Yes.
So back. So,
I used to watch that.
Yeah, it was great. So he had this non-speaking role on a boat because the guy he was with, was illegally fishing or something. It was just it was that kind of soft start before you get to the real case kind of thing. And we just thought, oh, wow, Jason's amazing. He got this part on water rats. Isn't he amazing? And that was kind of as achievable as you could actually imagine yourself to be. But you've got 12-year-olds now who have Instagram posts. You've got 12-year-olds who have YouTube channels who are, playing video games. Unboxing stuff. And so it feels achievable. And so I wonder if that feeds into this, that, I wonder if you asked our generation as kids, how many of you think you're going to be famous? I think there would have been a bigger gap between aspiration, wouldn't that be lovely, to, but do I think it's achievable? No, of course not.
Yeah.
Whereas now that has shrunk because you feel that it's so close.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And it's like that gatekeepers thing that you were saying before. Is that, there's the visibility of the lack of gatekeepers means that there's probably a greater feeling that you can become famous. Yep.
And if you can bait the right people, I mean, you see this on Twitter particularly, like people will tag famous people, or they'll tag the particular hashtag that's trending at that time to try and get their post, some inane post, trying to get it go viral. Because if you can tag the right people, get seen by the right people, and I'm sure it happens on Instagram as well, not on Instagram, but you were telling me a number of years ago about the White Fox story. It was just, a local to us brand, and then got picked up by a Kardashian. Was that the story?
No. So there's White Fox has always been a brand, is my understanding, and this is a women's clothing brand, so I don't know everything. But then there is Sarah's Day, who is she's from the Shire, and she has a very large following online.
Right.
And so she's done a number of different collaborations with White Fox.
Oh, right, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then a lot of girls in our area now wear White Fox, these White Fox jumpers.
Yeah.
Which I think is where a lot of it comes from.
Yeah. So again, you've got that, get picked up by the right person, goes viral, massive brand, et cetera, et cetera.
Which is, I also find that fascinating, but it's also the mums of those girls that are buying those jumpers, wear the jumpers as well.
Yeah, well, as millennial parents, we still think we're cool. So
I feel weird being called a millennial parent, but anyway.
It's
true.
Yeah,
no, 100% true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Where do we go from that though? If everyone is thinking they can be more famous, and there's this idea of vocation or calling, how do we help younger generations and even older generations be that shining light at work? Like, you're saying that we're not doing a very good job. What do you think you would change?
I think talking about it more, like just being really explicit about types of things. And the problem is that sometimes it's hard to do that in a large group. So, and I find this all the time when I'm preaching, I'm trying to think of applications. If you're talking to, even our smaller congregations, you might have 20 people there. Our large congregations, you might have 100 people there. So you're trying to create application for 100 people. I'm not going to nail anyone's particular story as you preach an application on that passage. But giving people tools in that large setting, but then it's going to come down to small, local things. So it might be the small group that you're in, it might be conversations over dinner, but just empowering people to have language around, okay, so what is that like for you? And obviously I think as pastors, we have that responsibility to the congregation in particular, but helping others, empower that as well. So you can ask each other, what do you think about this? And a small way, I think I talked about this a number of weeks ago, but we talked in my Bible study, we all have a word of the year that we're working on particularly. And so, I said to everyone, let's look through these characteristics of a Christian. I read through a number of different passages in Paul's writings and Peter's writings about different characteristics, different attributes and fruits of the Spirit, those kinds of things. And said, all right, I'd love you to think about and pray about what is the one thing that you want to particularly be intentional about this year. And so everyone in my small group has the word, their characteristic of, for this year, they're particularly thinking about, this. And so for me, it's discernment. So I've actually got it as a sticky note on my computer, so it's always right there at the front. So Philippians 1:9, this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so you may be able to, and this is the key bit, discern what is best.
Right.
And may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness, et cetera, et cetera. And so that idea of discernment, like how do I discern in this moment, at this point in time, small things, like right now in this next hour, what am I going to do? I want to be prayerful about, okay, I need to discern what is best. Is the best thing to get lost on the, train wreck that is American politics on Twitter? Or is the best thing to spend an hour actually preparing this thing that's due in a couple of days' time? One is the actual best and one is what I'll probably end up doing. Make a guess of which that is, which. But that idea, through to, big life choices, which, for me this year has been quite significant as well. Like trying to think through, what do I want to do, discerning what is best. So being prayerful about that. So that's been, that's my word. And it's a bit tokens and a bit naff sometimes. It's my word of the year or something. But I just thought it grounds people. And so other people in my group have talked about patience. That's their word. And because they can identify life things, relational things, vocational areas where actually they're being easily frustrated here or there or whatever it is. And so it's patience. They're particularly praying that God will grow them in their patience this year. And we can check in with each other. Oh, how'd you go? Like at work, you said this was the frustration. How's that? Family life, this was the frustration. How you go? How's the patience going for you in that? So we've all kind of had identified a particular thing. It's those kind of conversations, I think, will help us to have the vocabulary to go, what is it like to be a disciple of Jesus vocationally? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really cool idea. Because even looking at the book now, we'd say, what else can we do? And some of the like if I just run through a couple of headings, they say host a vocational Bible school and invest real resources into building young leaders. What else? Don't count out Christian education and mentorships. And to me, that kind of sounds a little bit like Band-Aidy. Like, let's just find something else to fix
they're
this problem.
programmatic answers.
Yeah, okay. Programmatic answers. I suppose where I'm trying to get to is then maybe a little bit little bit of navel gazing here, but I feel like the model that we have adopted here at Soul Revival is the shock absorber model, where we say that young people know what's going on in the changing culture. We bring the biblical wisdom of the older saints to kind of interpret that and pass that and figure that out. So I suppose that maybe I'm saying that maybe we are doing that a bit more, but I suppose I wonder is how do we help our younger crew understand that not all of them are going to be ministers, and they know that too, but how do we give them some guidance and wisdom in terms of that? Some people like to call it calling. We had Robert Doyle on the Chip Lunch podcast actually reinterpret what calling meant, which was quite an interesting one. I won't delve into that, but it's often said like, oh, God's called you to become this scientist, or God's called you to be an astronaut or an air traffic controller, like you said before. And I feel like a little bit like my tendency is to move away from that now. It's like your calling is where you are right now. It's where God's put you. So how do we generate the discussion around that for younger people who I feel like maybe they're finishing uni, or maybe they're finishing trade school, or maybe they're not even at uni. They know that they're going to need to be working for the vast majority of their life. And I'm wondering, what are the conversations that you need to have in regards to that? I know that you've worked in ministry quite a bit, so I don't know if I'm not trying to make a comparison here, but I wonder if I've actually worked in secular more than you have.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that's not a criticism at all, but it's like, yeah, I'm a little bit perplexed at how to have that conversation, because working in ministry and working not in ministry is very, very different. I'm just interested in your thoughts of like, where do you think that conversation can be had, and where do you think we should take that conversation, especially when we're talking to young people who are coming out of, and they're about to enter full-time work, which is such a change to everything you've been doing for the entirety of your life before then. So yeah, how do we help smooth that transition for them and chat to them about it? And also then like, well, this is what full-time work is going to involve. Because I feel like there's these milestones that a lot of people have in their lives, and you just get to them. You don't actually talk about them.
Right, yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, just to reaffirm that, I don't think calling is a great phrase in that sense of, oh, God's called me to be an air traffic controller, or big shout out to my friend Viv Chung at YouthWorks College. She's done her whole PhD on the language of calling in 1 Corinthians, I think, particularly. And her big argument is the language of calling in Paul's writings is explicitly about being called to be a Christian. It's got nothing to do with vocation. So we use vocational language and calling language as if, God's called me to be a teacher, God's called me to be a doctor. And Viv's just kind of saying, well, that is not actually how the Bible uses the word. So there might be, you might have other ways of phrasing it, but that is completely foreign to the context of the Bible to talk about, God called me to be a nurse. Whatever.
It's a good framework to have, like, we've been called to be Christians regardless of where we are. And
I think that's really helpful, yes, because it's, there's other statistics about, this Gen, I'm not sure what it is, millennials or Gen Z, the one below, but, the expectation is you'll have about 6 careers during your lifetime. Right. So again, very different to this. I start as an intern when I'm 18, fresh out of school, and on my 61st birthday, I'll retire from that organisation with a gold watch and a big party, and they'll say thank you very much. So that is well and truly long gone, that idea of life in a role. And so we should expect change. So part of that is, let's not put too much pressure on even our schooling and my son's in year 10. He has to, next week we get to pick subjects for year 11 and 12. And there's not too much in his school about, make sure you get the right subjects because this defines the rest of your life. I don't think that is coming from the school very much, but it's out there in culture, definitely. This, you've got to get it right. The subjects that you pick in year 11 will define the rest of your life. It's like, no, they won't. They won't at all. If he's going to go through 6 career changes, then the subjects he does, just do subjects that you enjoy And actually, I do really appreciate his school. Their big emphasis is on enjoying being a learner.
Okay.
Because if you're empowered to be a learner, then you'll find lots of jobs that you'll enjoy and lots of vocations. And if you can find areas to be curious about, then that's great. So we can talk to young people about those kinds of things, about when pick a uni degree. Yeah, you might have a strong passion for building bridges. Great, go into structural engineering. Like that makes sense if you really that excites you. And so definitely go into those kinds of things. But also it's okay to not decide who you're going to be at 65 when you're 16. And so part of this, but what are we called to be? We're called to be Christians. We're called to be disciples of Jesus. So whatever subjects my son picks next year, I hope that he takes on those subjects with a curiosity that looks out for the goodness, the truth, and the beauty in these subjects. That as he is a student, that he is kind, respectful, gracious, that he shows self-control in the ability to switch off screens and engage in hard work, even when that work is tiresome and it's a lot easier to play Clash of Clans rather than pursue with this hard algebra. But actually the reward at the end of pursuing with the hard algebra is worth it, because God has created us to be people who work through hard things for a joy of reward at the end. So there's who God has made us to be, all these kinds of things we talked about a lot on the podcast. That's who he is. He's not necessarily, the career he is going to be, but he is a Christian. He loves Jesus. And so my job, the job of the school, was a Christian school, so they care about his spiritual aspects as well as his academic aspects. They're going to be coaching him. We're going to be coaching him. Michael Greaves, shout out to key listener Michael Greaves, and the other youth leaders who are guiding him through life are going to be shepherding him and discipling him and helping him to know what does it mean to be a Christian as you study these subjects. What does that look like? And so if we can do that with our young people, with our young workers, to work out, and then, is God calling me to be a banker or a lawyer? I don't know. I don't know if God even knows or cares. He does care if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
He does care if you are living with the fruit of the Spirit, that you've put off the old self and you're putting on the new self and being renewed in that each day. And you can do that in many, if not most, vocations. There are going to be some vocations that are going to exclude themselves because the actual nature of the vocation is probably so outside of being a Christian. So, obviously, prostitution or gambling, or there's going to be, being a hitman. There are going to be particular vocations that you look at and go, I'm actually not sure if a child of God can engage.
I don't think that's my calling.
You don't think you're being called to be a hitman?
Just play the game Hitman, that's it.
Oh, right, yeah. So, but for most, but within any vocation, there are going to be pinch points. And there's going to be times when, again, go back to the IT example, your company or your boss says, I want you to contribute to this code and it's going to be making this product. And you go, actually, I'm not confident that is doing what it says to be doing, or it's going to create adverse effects. So you see this in the secular world, even those who by conviction have left companies like Meta and Facebook and Instagram. They go, actually, we know that Instagram is damaging the mental health of young people. Internally, we know this. We've done reviews on it. We've got the evidence, and we are doing nothing to change that. In fact, actually, the way we are marketing and the way that we are building the programming and the code and the algorithm for Instagram is only contributing to more harm, not less harm. And so there are people who have, with good conscience have said, actually, I'm going to leave Meta and I'm not going to work for them because the job that I was engaged in was creating a product that was doing more harm than good. So, that would be detrimental. So there's any vocation, but we want to help people think through that. Is what you're creating, is the environment you're working in, blah, blah, blah. Thinking about those things as a disciple of Jesus, I think that's the really key thing.
Well, they finished this chapter on Faith for Exiles by saying, the most resilient young Christians are stronger when we connect discipleship and vocation. However, my favourite part of what you said was No matter what it is, are they being Christians where they are? But then you said, was it truth, beauty, and
Goodness.
goodness? I thought was a really, really cool. For example, there's another someone they quote here: to create beauty, to cultivate abundance, and to generate order, as well. No matter what you're doing, I think that's the key to it, isn't it? Is to discuss about, well, God has put you in this situation. Are you creating beauty or cultivating abundance and generating order according to His will?
Mm.
And I think that's answered my question where I was fumbling around a little bit, is that's the discussion you can have. Not, oh, God's called you to be an amazing this, but if you like you're talking about your example with your son Micaiah, is like, well, how did you make that decision? Did you make that decision thinking about what God would think, or did you just make that decision in terms of your own sinful self?
Yep.
Did you do the hard algebra? Why? Oh, because it's important to be disciplined. Because God says we need to be disciplined.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because in this life, part of working the garden in Eden was there was work involved. Adam and Eve still needed to plant the crops and do the hard, like all of that was still part of work in the garden before the fall. And post the fall, we've got thorns and thistles and pain in childbirth. So both of those are representative of the roles of men and women are frustrated by sin.
Yes.
And so both work in and of itself is good and is pre-fall, and the work that we are called to do to flourish in society and to populate the world is now impacted by the frustration of sin. And so, both doing algebra is good in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be frustrations attached to it as well. That is going to be hard and painful sometimes to push through. And both of those are true at the same time, regardless of whatever the subject is.
Yeah. I think that's where it's a good place to leave it, unless you had anything else to say.
Well, I was just going to say, the transcendentals is good, truth and beauty. So that's the technical
good
name.
Truth, beauty, yep.
Yeah. So it's medieval Christianity really kind of honed this, but it harks back to Plato, Augustine, Aristotle, those kind of people. But there's lots of other places that it can be found. The other thing I was just going to highlight was an interview I heard a number of months ago of someone who is doing this Christian vocational thing. So there's another podcast I listen to, which I highly recommend. It's called Think Biblically. It comes out of Biola University in California. Sean McDowell is one of the hosts, and I've now forgotten the name of the other host. Anyway, the episode I'm thinking of it's called People First Leadership. It was published on May 28th this year. But it's an interview with Jack Hollis, and he's an executive vice president of Toyota in North America.
Right.
And he says, he loves to say, I work for Jesus and I get paid by Toyota. So the whole conversation of about half an hour, 35 minutes, is about what it means for him to lead a successful business and live out his faith at the same time. And so this again is this conversation of not, oh, Jack, you're a vice president. Can you come and serve on the church board because we really need people with your skills? No. It's how do you, as a vice president of Toyota in North America, how do you do your job as a disciple of Jesus? And I just thought it was a really great example of this chapter in action of how do you have someone who's a high-flying executive who is a Christian saying, I'm going to intentionally be a disciple of Jesus in this space. And he talks about some of the decisions he's made and the way he runs teams and the choices he will and won't make, how that's all shaped by his love for Jesus. And because he's been really authentic about that, the way that he's able to witness for Jesus, yes, but just to live out being a disciple and the good and the true and the beautiful in his work. So I just thought that if people want to dig further, that's a great
that's a good one
to talk about that.
I'll chuck that as a link in the show notes, but I really like that line, I work for Jesus but get paid by Toyota. Yeah, that's a good way to finish. Well, thank you, Tim.
No worries.
It's been a fun conversation as
Thank
always.
You, Joel.
If you want to get involved in the chat, you can drop a comment on YouTube or you can email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au, and we will bring it on the podcast whether it's a question or a comment or you want to call us out on something. But hopefully these things that we're talking about in terms of resilient disciples are really making you think. Just think. Don't have to be changing anything, but thinking about how can we better serve Jesus.
And what would be really great is if people did want to write in with how do you as a Christian live out that discipleship in your workplace?
Yes.
What does that actually look like? I know, we have listeners who work across range of different industries. And so, what does that actually look like?
Even friends like Grace from our ride gathering who works at the City Bible Forum.
Yeah, actually, if we want to take this conversation further, Grace would be a great one to
I agree.
talk about that as well.
I think so too. Or check out City Bible Forum. I'll put the link in the show notes for that. Having said that, that's the end of this episode, but we'll be back next week with another episode talking about resiliency in discipleship. Last practice to go. Here we go. Thanks very much, Tim.
Thanks, Joel.
Have a good day.
One way.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.